I hope you're doing well. My name is Ryan Lee, and today at DataCon Los Angeles, I will be sharing my presentation on the moral responsibility of data professionals. So before I get started, there's a couple of disclosures that I wanted to cover. First of which is I speak on behalf of myself alone. My views do not represent those of my employer. And lastly, I have no financial stake in any of the software or tools discussed in this presentation. Today, we'll be going through a brief personal intro of myself. We'll be discussing the power that data professionals have, as well as looking at a couple of case studies of data-related scandals. We'll also explore the moral use of data and data ethics. We'll go through a quick overview of whistleblowing, as well as steps to prevent scandals. And lastly, before we close, we will cover follow-up readings and presentations. So as a quick personal intro on myself, I started at UC Berkeley, and when I started my freshman year, I knew that I wanted to try a career in statistics and data. So I took a couple classes. I ended up really enjoying it. So I studied statistics throughout my time at Berkeley. I did graduate from Berkeley, and just my education and my career up to this point have been very heavily focused on statistics and on data. So my course curriculum, my internship, my job experiences so far, very much geared towards that industry. Currently, I am a senior data analyst at a tiny place called the Walt Disney Company. At Disney, I mainly support revenue analytics for our e-commerce platform, which is shopdisney.com. But there are also a number of other initiatives that I do support in a number of other capacities. These initiatives include Disney Privacy, the Disney Store, the Disney Visa with JPMorgan Chase, the Disney Subscription Box program, among others. In 2020, one fun fact about me is that I learned how to golf, kind of. And this is my first time speaking at DataCon Los Angeles. I have spoken at various smaller data events in the past, but I'm really excited to be here with you all. I'll cover a bit of why I chose this topic of moral responsibility and data ethics. I think I could have spoken on a number of different items today, such as how to be a BI analyst or how to build effective Tableau visualizations, but I didn't feel that that would be a good use of my time nor your time. One, because I don't know if I'm the authority on Tableau and visualizations, and secondly is things change fast in the data space, and no one truly knows where things are going. For example, Snowflake is an incredibly popular platform in 2020, but in 5 years, who knows what the popular platforms will be. So I decided to stay away from those kinds of topics. But one need that is constant, regardless of what platforms or methodologies are popular at the moment, this constant need is the need for data professionals to be ethical. My hope is that you either leave this presentation with new perspectives and new understandings, or you have your current beliefs and current understandings affirmed. Either of these two scenarios is a success to me. So really quick, let's dive into discussing the power of data professionals. So whether or not you realize it as a data professional, you have incredible power in your positions, and you work in sensitive, robust spaces. Examples of the kinds of power that data professionals have is, we create algorithms to push certain content. We create models to flag and target certain individuals. We bear influence over data privacy and data governance. We have expansive access to sensitive data such as customer date of birth, phone number, demographics, number of friends, etc. Data professionals like you and myself are looked to advise decisions and at times to be arbiters of the truth. And this power can be used for incredible endeavors, but can also be used to harm others. But we should feel, as data professionals, we should feel empowered that we actually have these powerful, influential positions in our companies. Now let's take a quick look at what can happen when data is not used morally. There are 3 items that I want to cover really quickly. The first of which is the Facebook Cambridge Analytica 2018 scandal, where millions of Facebook users' data was excessively shared with Cambridge Analytica. The second item I wanted to cover was Panera Bread hiding their 2018 data breach. For 8 months, Panera was aware of a data breach in 2018, yet they did not publicly disclose it, nor did they even fix it for 8 months. And as a result of this, over the period of over half a year, millions of customers' identifiable information was stolen from Panera, and this was entirely preventable. The third scandal I want to cover is the YouTube settlement in 2019 with the Federal Trade Commission over the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. YouTube settled for over $150 million with the Federal Trade Commission because they collected excessive data on children without parental consent for years. And under COPPA, which is the Children Online Privacy Protection Act, children are protected from having their data collected without consent. So, these 3 examples show us what happens when data is not used morally or when individuals are negligent when it comes to data. In terms of practicing, data ethics, it's important to do so in order to avoid scandals and to really safeguard our customers. I think many individuals in the data space, we don't think that regulations and ethics is our job, and that is the absolute wrong mindset. If we touch data. Our jobs revolve around data, and therefore, because we touch data in different kinds of capacities, we are also involved in the data ethics process, whether or not we want to be. We are implicit in the entire data pipeline. So I think one thing data professionals as a whole should stop doing is treating data like it's only a plaything for us to do cool things with. We should start looking at data, thinking about it as something that we are responsible for, something that we should be good stewards for, and something that we should want to be good stewards for as well. I'll be covering a couple of areas in terms of how we can practice data ethics in this presentation. These areas that I'm going to cover include knowing your data, change management, access governance, incident response, company definitions, exercising general ethical judgment, and then lastly, whistleblowing when needed. So the first discussion point for data ethics that I have is really stressing that we should know our data, and we should know what our data sources are, who we're sharing data with, what the different environments that we have, what transformations certain data elements undergo. We should be aware of data relations, database infrastructures. We should be aware of data dictionaries. I think to make the best decisions, we must see the whole elephant. I think a lot of data professionals today, we don't see the entire data pipeline. We see what's relevant to us. We see a little bit in terms of what's upstream. We see a little bit of what's downstream, but we don't really have the overarching kind of vision and visibility. And I think that's something that we should try to strive for. It's important to know your data. If you don't see the whole elephant, you don't know what to do with the elephant. So that's the first step towards data ethics, is getting to know your data, not just the data specific to you, but data across the company. Second item I want to cover as it relates to data ethics is change management and peer review. We should make sure our data organizations follow change management processes. This includes documenting use cases of changes and developments, receiving stakeholder sign-offs for proposed initiatives, document any changes and developments that we make into production, and receive stakeholder approval, among others. We also want to make sure that our data organization follows a peer review and QA process. Are our production level results validated or acknowledged by peers? Do we have regression testing and hypercare and retrospectives? It's important to have change management and peer review to make sure that all the changes we make to data, or all the initiatives that we are using data for in a production level capacity, we want to make sure that they're all documented, that they're reviewed, that they go through QA, and that we're confident that a group of people have signed off on it. I think access governance is a great discussion point for data ethics. It is incredibly important to understand, that certain people shouldn't have access to sensitive data, and that access has to be limited to a small group of people. So we have to ask ourselves, as data professionals, if our access governance function is strong and functional. How is it determined in terms of who gets read-write access to data environments? Are access user groups regularly reviewed for their permissions? Are there limits to who can query sensitive data? Are there limits to who can write to source data systems? It's important that only the right people are seeing the right data to mitigate and minimize the risks of leaks or abuse happening. Is making sure only the people who need something can use it. Fifthly, the fifth discussion point for data ethics is having proper incident response in place at your company. As data professionals, we should make sure that there are formal protocol and processes in place for data incidents. These data incidents include database backup failures, data breaches. And we want to make sure that there's standard protocol and processes in place, and we want to make sure that they're being followed when these events do occur. And if protocol is not being followed for database backup failures, let's ask ourselves, what's preventing it? What can we do to help? We should also, make sure that there's regular war games to validate incident protocol and processes such as database failovers. It's critical that the company responds to detrimental data incidents in timely and sufficient manners. Data incidents can have horrible effects downstream, and we really want to mitigate the adverse effects that happen with the data incidents. So having a proper incident response is one way to really mitigate that. The next point I have on data ethics is having definition sign-off and consensus. I think it's important to receive stakeholder sign-off and consensus on definitions. We should understand as data professionals how data flows kind of tie in and relate to these definitions, and how they kind of shape the definitions and formulas and calculations that the company uses. We should make sure that we maintain consistent terminology and methodology, and make sure that we maintain a company definition dictionary. I want to use Yelp as a case study. Yelp, for those of you who are not aware, is a tech platform that allows users to review local businesses. Yelp recently, I think 2 weeks ago, released a feature that enables businesses to be flagged for potentially racist activity. Some concepts that Yelp must and should include, some concepts that Yelp must and should define using data include, one, how are racism and how are racist businesses defined? Two, how do single employee acts represent the entire branch of the business or the entire franchise of the business? And at what point can a racist business become not racist? These definitions that Yelp is using, they have far-reaching effects, and businesses have possible grounds to sue for libel if Yelp is not careful. So that's why it's important to have stakeholder sign-off on the definitions you use, and have those definitions shaped by data, shaped by lessons from data exercises. Data plays a big part in how the company kind of defines things and views things, and we have to make sure that the data and company definitions are aligned and that they support each other. Second to last, in terms of data ethics discussion points, is just general exercising of ethical judgment. There's a lot of things that we can do on an individual level that can help our companies practice data ethics. A lot of the items I covered before, like access governance and incident response, those are really things that happen on a department and an organization level. This slide is really focused on you as an individual. There are things that you as an individual must do to be a moral and ethical data professional. One of them is to, really share knowledge with your coworkers, to not hide or manipulate information, to really listen to others' concerns as it relates to data. Data can really shape stories, but it's important that we don't prefabricate our stories. Anyone can use bias evidence to back nearly anything they wanted, but that's not the point. That's not our goal as data professionals. And at the end of the day, don't do anything that you would not want done to yourself. This sounds simple, but we actually need to take time as individuals and sit down and think about, okay, what am I doing now that may not be ethical, or what are things that I want to prevent or stay away from. There's basic things like not stealing customer data or not bringing customer data into our local desktops, making sure we're collecting data in fair and equitable manners. These are all things that we need to sit down and think about on an individual level and really assess. Just make sure that we as individual data professionals are exercising general ethical judgment. The last discussion point for data ethics is whistleblowing. So even if you use data ethically yourself, you may encounter others that are very abusive in corporate settings, and you may need to whistleblow against these individuals for the corporate abuse. Whistleblowing may actually be the only option to stop abuse and save customers at a certain point. In terms of why should you whistleblow, I know it's hard, but it is the right thing to do. And actually, if you are able to prevent something, but you did not, you are legally liable, and you may face fines, bans, reputational damage, and a worst case scenario, you may go to prison. The CEO of WorldCom, Bernie Ebbers, he ended up, after the WorldCom scandal in the late 90s, he ended up getting sentenced to prison for many years, and he only was released, I think, last year because of his failing health. As it relates to whistleblowing, no one said that doing the right thing is easy, and the image that Hollywood gives doesn't help either. I think Hollywood makes it seem so easy to save the world. Movies like Justice League. Ben Affleck saves the world. At the end of the day, his hair looks great and his clothes are clean, and it looks so easy to do the right thing. Unfortunately, that's not the real world, and things are dirtier in the real world. And while it's important to do the right thing, we have to come to terms with the fact that it's not going to be easy. It may be really hard. Cynthia Cooper, who was the WorldCom whistleblower, she said that whistleblowing against WorldCom and bringing to light some of the abuses and the fraud that was happening, it was one of the most gratifying experiences of her life, but it was also incredibly stressful for her, and incredibly put her through a lot of trials, emotionally and intellectually. So I'm not saying that whistleblowing is going to be easy, but it is the right thing to do if that's the option that's left. So to cover what is whistleblowing, Whistleblowing essentially is someone who reports waste, fraud, abuse, or dangerous activity in order in hopes of rectifying the wrongdoing. Anyone can be a whistleblower, even you, and there are protections against retaliation in most whistleblower cases. And whistleblowing and scandals have existed forever. This year, 2020, a big one we saw was the Wirecard scandal over the summer. A couple years back, we can look at Wells Fargo, and we can see their fraudulent account scandal. Turn of the century, obviously we saw WorldCom and Cynthia Cooper, as well as Enron. In the mid 1900s, we had Watergate, and going back even before the 1900s, all across the world, there are many different historical and archaeological and religious texts that have that describe varying accounts of scandals and whistleblowers. In terms of how to whistleblower in America, the first thing that you want to do is determine the type of complaint that you have. Is it an embezzlement complaint, a financial terrorism complaint? Is it a waste dumping complaint? And then the next thing you want to do is document your support and your arguments, and then find the appropriate governing body, whether that's a bank body or the SEC or the EPA or a congressional body. It's important to find which government body your complaint most closely aligns with. Next thing you want to do is write and submit your complaint, and then, if needed, notify law enforcement and/or retain the services of a lawyer. This is as a quick personal story. I can go through my own kind of personal experience with whistleblowing. When I was in high school, I whistleblew on myself. I won an LA County legal essay competition, but I didn't necessarily win it fairly. I technically did not complete the required pre-competition tasks. So I felt guilty about it, and I admitted to the administrators to winning without having followed policies. The administrators were actually pretty confused when I told them, but I said, it's okay. I'll come back and I'll win it next year fairly. And actually, I ended up winning the next 2 years. So it's funny how things turn out sometimes. On a more serious note, I do have a corporate whistleblowing story. This is my personal experience at a prior employer, not at Disney. I was directed to manipulate data and hide information. But as a risk data analyst, my work kind of guided the company's regulatory efforts. And so my role was to be an arbiter of the truth, so my work should have been honest. Despite that, at first I kind of complied with these unethical directions, and later I attempted to reason over this unethical work, and attempts to reason eventually led to manager retaliations, and after some time I kind of was forced to resign in order to protect my own well-being and my safety. So I do have currently an open, if belated, whistleblower case against this misconduct. I'm not going to cover anything in too deep detail now, but please feel free to reach out to me privately if you want to discuss. I also want to cover how to avoid whistleblowing, and the way we avoid whistleblowing is by preventing scandals. It's important to whistleblow, but it's better to prevent scandals in the first place. We have to remember that scandals are not fires, they're not earthquakes, they're not natural disasters or acts of God. Scandals are perpetuated by humans alone and are entirely preventable. They're not only preventable at the highest levels of company management, but they're also preventable at every level of the company, yours included. They can be prevented in a variety of different ways, some of which we will discuss in the following slides. And I want to stress that it's almost empowering that we as employees, even if we are entry level, very tactile people, we still have the power to prevent scandals. I think one of the first steps we can take towards preventing scandals is making sure that employees and peers have awareness of certain regulations that affect us, specific to data and otherwise. I've listed a couple here that I need to be familiar with in my job. Those include, CCPA, SOX, COPPA. I think it's also important that data professionals and every professional really gets general exposure to risk and regulatory engagements. I recommend that data professionals participate in, at least one risk or regulatory engagement every few years or so. And that may, it may be as simple as providing database specifications for a SOX IT audit, but just exposure to these risk and regulatory engagements is important for us to understand how our work ties into compliance and regulations, and just how everything kind of connects. The second step I think that companies can take towards preventing scandals is regulatory trainings. It's important that we educate our workforce on policies and regulations. Most public companies have mandatory compliance trainings. Let's encourage our direct reports and our peers to take this training seriously. Let's finish training modules by the due date. Let's encourage discussions on takeaways. Let's have a no tolerance policy for antagonism, no tolerance for excuses on truancy, and even enforce penalties for training truancy and policy violations. I think having a robust regulatory training is a great step towards preventing scandals. The third discussion point I have for preventing scandals is diversity and embracing diversity. I know embracing diversity is a prominent concept, very popular concept. It's a huge buzzword this year. I'm not gonna preach on social implications or obligations. What I will say is diversity does add value to risk mitigation practices and does add value to consumer protection. This is because diverse teams enable organizations to make fairer decisions and fairer products for the customers. Diversity does not mean that you hire one gay male on your team to fulfill some arbitrary quota. Diversity means being open to different perspectives, different viewpoints, hearing those viewpoints out. I think Supreme Court Justices Ruth Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor are prime examples, and they've added incredible value to major judicial cases because they really pushed to have the female perspective considered and heard. I think they added great value to the Supreme Court because of that. The fourth discussion point I have around preventing scandals is on peer learning and mentorship. I think it's incredibly important that our employees engage in peer learning events and peer learning programs. These include internal lunch and learning sessions, internal speaker series, internal newsletters. These may also include formal peer learning programs. One peer learning program that I've been exposed to is Leaders Atlas. I think it's a great platform, and having a formal peer learning program at your company will really only help your employees, because peer learning enables you to understand how your work affects others and exposes you to new concepts and new internal knowledge. Equally as important to peer learning is the concept of finding a company mentor. Mentors do a great job of kind of sharing best practices, data or otherwise. Making sure that you're shaping into a good kind of steward of data within corporate America, or a good member of corporate America, period. My first data mentor was a man named Shashi Curran. We still keep in touch, and I want to thank him a lot for the guidance that he's given me. And he teaches some amazing analytics classes at the graduate level at Santa Clara University, if you're ever interested. Just kind of to tie this all up, peer learning and mentorship are very important efforts for preventing scandals, because it encourages people to learn from one another and see how they affect others. The next discussion point I have around preventing scandals is the existence of strict employee standards for both new hires and current employees. It's important that we rigorously vet new hires. Just because someone completes an 8-week data science certificate course does not mean that they're qualified. We as companies, we as employees need to truly assess candidate background, knowledge, value system, etc. We have to make sure we're hiring ethical people, that we're hiring people that will do the right thing. And it sounds like it sounds much easier than it actually is, but getting people who will do things the right way is of the most importance. In addition to rigorous new hire standards, we should also hold our current employees to rigorous standards. The CEO of Netflix, Reed Hastings, really, really brilliant man, and he measures employee value by productivity. And Netflix attracts, retains, and promotes only productive employees. I know it sounds simple, but you would be surprised how many companies don't follow this approach. And I think Netflix has a great system. It's obviously worked incredible so far. Netflix is a streaming giant. It's a tech giant. It's really kind of become a mainstay in America. And I think every company can really adopt Netflix's system, and we can blend that system to include ethical standards too. We should start measuring employee value by ethical productivity and champion employees who are ethically productive, and get comfortable with terminating employees who are not ethical, who bring down our ethical standards, who expose shareholders and customers to unnecessary risks. I think we don't have to be heartless, but it's important that we have high ethical standards and demand ethical practices from our employees. Next, I want to cover internal support as it relates to preventing scandals. It's important to have certain infrastructures in place. Some of these include having an internal fraud / malpractice hotline, having formal protocol for when employees want to raise concerns. We want to make sure that employee concerns are heard, that they don't get swept away, that they feel that they can speak out, and we want to make sure that they don't feel physically or emotionally threatened for raising these concerns, and we have to make sure that we protect employees' physical and emotional well-being. We should also staff regulatory engagements with qualified leaders. If needed, we may need to utilize consulting firms for an augmentation of knowledge or augmentation of experience as needed. I've had great experience working with Accenture, as well as smaller Los Angeles-based shops like C&M. Both groups have great staff and great leaders for leading regulatory engagements. I also want to cover risk management tools. I think risk management tools are incredibly important in preventing scandals. It's difficult to manually raise and manually track company regulatory deficiencies. Jira is an okay tool to use, but the objective of Jira is not for risk management. The objective of project management tools is not risk management. So I highly recommend every company utilizes a risk management tool. And my personal recommendation is Audit Board. The Audit Board is fully designed for teams to manage internal controls and compliance. Please let me know if you would like a referral, because I think Audit Board is a great product in this space, and I can't speak highly enough of it. But regardless of whether or not, regardless of what tool you use, I highly recommend that every team has a risk management kind of tool and process that they use, even if it's something as simple as Jira. The last discussion point I had for preventing scandals is the little things. The little things really add up. First of which is we should all want to be customers of our company, we should all, from time to time, take the hour out of our day to consume the fruits of our labor, to see the downstream effects of our work, and recognize what can go wrong from a user perspective. Recognize how you and how I, as end users, can be harmed. What would benefit us? What would be harmful to us? It's important to put yourselves really in the consumer's shoes and just have a full end-to-end vision on the life cycle of the product you provide. It's also important to familiarize yourself with best data practices. This can come in the form of attending conferences, webinars, networking happy hours. It's critical that that we're always up to date with best practices, newest trends, and having awareness of this will help us kind of prevent scandals, because we want to practice things in the best way and be the best stewards that we can. The last item I have is I really want to stress that it's important to build relationships with your legal and compliance and audit teams. These teams are not your predators, they are your partners. And on the flip side, data and technology departments, we should also be holding legal and compliance and audit teams accountable as well. These relationships are incredibly important, and just to talk about how important they are, I want to bring up Cynthia Cooper and WorldCom again. Cynthia Cooper, who whistleblew against WorldCom. Cynthia Cooper was the chief executive of the audit department at WorldCom, and she partially credits her work, her whistleblowing work, to her great relationships with the WorldCom technology teams. Those relationships enabled her to see and discover things that she would have had a harder time doing otherwise. So that partnership really helped her kind of bring to light to the world some of the abuses that WorldCom was engaged in. So that wraps up my discussion points. There are some follow-up readings and presentations that I would like to suggest. The first of which is Cynthia Cooper's book on the WorldCom scandal. This is her kind of personal recant of what happened, of what went wrong, of what her experience was like, the kind of pressure she was under, the misgivings that she had, and the internal drive that she had, and the overall ethical practices that she wanted to champion, and the person that she wanted to be, and the person that she became. So I highly recommend this book, and if you ever actually have a chance to hear Cynthia Cooper speak, I 100% recommend doing so. I have listened to a number of prominent, speakers, but I will say that Cynthia Cooper is, one of my 3 favorite speakers of all time. I highly recommend her. She's a wonderful person. She's incredibly intelligent. She has a lot of interesting things to share, and it's her story, regardless of whether or not you read the book, her story and her involvement in WorldCom is an important lesson in whistleblowing and in corporate abuse that everyone should know, because we may find ourselves in similar situations. Another follow-up reading slash recommendation I have is to attend Daphne Chung's presentation tomorrow at DataCon Los Angeles. Daphne is one of my friends. She is presenting on data science and intersectionality, and she'll be covering how to recognize misrepresentations in data and mitigate biases in data. So I highly recommend her presentation. Intersectionality is a very important topic, it's very applicable to data. It has not necessarily gotten the coverage or the popularity that it should have, or that it should be getting. But I highly recommend Daphne's presentation. If you thought my presentation was good, it's only because you haven't seen Daphne's yet. And if you disliked my presentation, then Daphne will make her presentation will make your DataCon experience worthwhile. In closing, there's a couple comments that I want to make. The 21st century has made a lot of things easier. Your car can drive itself while you take a voice call on your waterproof smartwatch. But the 21st century has also introduced new ways to harm the public. These threats touch various parts of the data industry. You do have the power to prevent an Enron-level moment, though. Don't forget that. You should feel very empowered as data professionals that you are in positions of influence and in such positions to where you have this visibility and to where you have this voice. So let's go and build a better and safer corporate world for all of us. I want to thank you. Thank you, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. I want to extend an invitation to connect. Please reach out if you have any other questions or if you want to discuss. And I truly hope to see you again at a future conference. It was a privilege to be here today, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. And thank you again.